The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hi everybody. Welcome to Unit 2 of the Lunch and Learn series. I just want to make sure I'm being heard. So could you just type in the word clear in the question box? Just over on the right-hand side, just click the question box. Thanks, Angela. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Tanya. Thanks, Adam. Okay, sounds like it's coming across loud and clear. So welcome. Hopefully you've had a chance to complete your influencing capabilities profile, which is the link that I sent you. I know many of you have, and if you haven't, don't despair, you can complete it after this, but this is pretty much a debrief on that profile to give you some clarity around how you might be able to improve your ability to persuade other people. All right, so a couple of things before we get underway. As I said last time, if you've got questions, comments, observations, type them in that box where you wrote the word clear, and I get to see them, and I won't be leaving 10 minutes at the end for question time. So the idea is just type your question or comment in there and I'll get to see it, and I'll respond to it wherever I am in the program. So you can see now the Lunch and Learn series, we've got 6 units that we're looking at, and you can see that we're up to number 2 at this stage. So as you would be aware that I set some homework for each session, and you got 2 weeks to sort of implement whatever it is, and you had some homework last time, of course, which is around the first topic, which is around giving effective feedback, and I asked you all to give 3 bits of feedback, and I hope you've had a chance to do that. So the idea would be to to go out and to give some positive feedback to 3 times a day. I hope you're continuing that, because it'll make all the difference, and if you've done it, it's quite significant, the difference it can make. So the whole thing is, in this Lunch and Learn, we're building on each unit. So the idea is that we just don't discard one because we're on to the next thing. We actually we build on each, which is really important. Anyway, let's talk about today. So today we're going to talk about influencing and how it relates to leadership. Now, I wrote a book on this called The New Influencing Toolkit in 2015. And the reason I wrote the book was because I went out looking for information on how to influence. And what I found was there wasn't much information that was applicable to me as a manager or a leader. And so what we had at one end of the continuum, we had very academic material, which frankly wasn't practical and wasn't helpful. So that material wasn't going to work. At the other end of the continuum, there was very salesy type material, how to win the sale or smile training or whatever you want to call it. And that wasn't very useful for me either. So I thought, well, why don't I design my own model and my own questionnaire and write a book about it, which I've done. And it's become very popular. So the influencing capabilities profile is a direct result of my frustrations with the lack of things that were out there and available. So I think it's very applicable to you as a leader, and I'll get to that in a minute. So to start the process today, I just want to talk a little bit about what influence means. I think a lot of people think it's being cunning and underhanded or shifty or something like that. It's actually nothing to do with that, and I think it's important that we dispel those myths immediately, because I think if people think that, it would be misleading. Okay, George is just asking, what's the full name of your book again? Pretty please, I'm sure I can find on the website. Actually, scrap that. Oh, okay, you have. Well, for what it's worth, it's called The New Influencing Toolkit, Capabilities for Communicating with Influence. That's it, right? That's what it looks like. So if you just type those words in, you'll get that. Thanks. Thanks for the opportunity for the free plug, Georgia. Appreciate that. Okay. So once we talk about influence and realize that it's not about being cunning and manipulative, I'm going to talk about the influencing capability framework and how it all works. So the whole idea is that if you've completed your profile and you've got it close by, and you should have that, you can refer to it at different points throughout the presentation today. If you haven't, at least you've got a prerequisite to know that you can still complete it as part of the program. I'm going to refer to the 4 influencing strategies. Now, there are 4 influencing strategies I highlight in the profile or in the framework, and you would get scores around those, and the one that's the highest is the one that you feel most favourably disposed to using, and it's probably the one that you like other people to use when they're influencing you too. But the truth of the matter is it can also be a poison chalice in the sense that you're using it too often, and the fact is that other people may not be influenced by the same things that you're influenced by. And we've all had that where we're trying to influence somebody and the glaze goes in their eye, and we try even harder to throw something at them and we get nowhere. So what we need to do is to go to a plan B or a plan C or a plan D or whatever it might be. And the final thing we'll do today is look at some influencing, some practical things you can do to improve your influence. Now, the book has 64 tools in it. That's why we call it a toolkit. But I'm going to share with you about 12 today. So at least you'll have something to work with. And guess what? Your homework's to go out and try some stuff as usual. All right. So let's get stuck into it. Now, I've got 4 characters here on the page. I'm sure you can all see that. I'm just going to make sure you do. Yep, there it is now. So you've got 4 characters on the page there. Now, what I want to ask you is this, and I'm actually going to ask you directly. I want you to answer this, via the question box. So I'm not going to tell you who they are. You probably know who some of them are, and there's probably others that are familiar, but you're not quite, can't put a name to it. I don't know. I can tell you one thing for sure, that there's 3 of them that are dead and 1's still alive. I can say that for sure. And I'll tell you a few other things as well. But what have they all got in common? Does anyone like to type in an answer there? What do you think all 4 of those people have got in common? Can I just get some answers from you, please? So what do they all have in common? What do you think it might be? Charismatic, says Georgia. Yep. Leaders, says Tanya. Yep, absolutely right. You got that right. Anyone else? Don't be shy. What have they got in common? What do you think they all... Powerful communication style. Yeah, great. Leaders of leaders, says Edwin. Strong brand. Excellent. Clear vision. Yeah, they've all got those things. You're absolutely spot on. Inspirational, says Angela. Yeah, absolutely. I might say to you this, though. They're all highly controversial. Very good at influencing, says Tom. Yeah, I guess at the end of the day, Tom, that's what I was alluding to. But look, I have to say to you that polarizing, thank you, Georgia, that's my point here, that these 4 people are polarizing. People either love them or they hate them. I mean, that's the reality. But whether you love or hate them, you can't discount the fact that they've been enormous giants in historical history, right? And so they have been highly influential, and they still are in some respects, even though 3 of them are dead. Now, I'm going to use these 4 people because these are the 4 people who exhibit a very strong trait around each of the 4 influencing styles that I'm going to talk about. And I've been politically correct by 2 female, 2 male. I've also been politically correct by putting left-wing versus right-wing political views down too. So no one can accuse me of being biased in that sense. But you will have an emotional reaction to these four, depending on your own preconceived idea of what they're about. I've never met any of them. I've read a lot about them, but I can tell you that they all exhibit a strong sense of influence. So let's go round, starting up the top in the left-hand corner. That person's name is Al Gore. He was a former Vice President of the United States during the Clinton administration. And in 2000, he stood against George W. Bush. And that was a highly controversial election because you might recall that that election was decided in the courts. It was that close. And there was a lot of controversy about the voting irregularities in the state of Florida. But after he left the White House as the vice president, he became a climate change activist. And he had a very famous video called The Inconvenient Truth. You just have to go to YouTube and have a look. And by the way, on your profiles, if you click up on the right-hand side of your profile, the electronic version, of course, if you click on the right-hand, up the right top in the symbol on the right-hand side, you'll get video clips of all four of these people. The next one along is Dr. Martin Luther King, who was he was a civil rights activist in the 1960s. And he gave perhaps one of the greatest speeches of all time in 1965, I think, called I Have a Dream. And it was just a brilliant speech. And again, it'd be worth having a look at that. But there were no facts in the speech at all, none. Doesn't mean it was incorrect. It just meant it was all around rhetoric and timing and phrasing and those sorts of things. It was just a brilliant speech. And he got assassinated, actually, in 1968, in the same year that Bobby Kennedy got assassinated in the United States. But there's no question that he had enormous influence around civil rights in America. The next person along is Margaret Thatcher. Now, Dame Thatcher was Britain's first female Prime Minister. She was Britain's first female Prime Minister, and she lasted 11 years, which is an incredible achievement, 11 years in office. Now, people either loved her or hated her. There was no in between, but when she died, there were people dancing in the streets, celebrating her demise. But those that love her would say that she did a lot of things for Great Britain. So I don't want to get into that, but I just wanted to say that she had enormous influence as a political leader in the United Kingdom. And the last person there is Mother Teresa, who was anointed a sainthood by the Catholic Church a couple of years ago, and posthumously, of course. Mother Teresa was a great pioneer for the poor of Calcutta originally and other parts of the world, such as Ethiopia. And she brought together lots of coalitions of support from people all over the place to help people who were in extreme poverty. And so there were a lot of volunteers that were working with her, and she was able to influence lots of people to give up their life for this worthy cause. So all of them have had enormous influence. All of them are highly controversial. I mean, you can read things about them that aren't favourable, but one thing is for sure, they've all had an influence. So you're all perfectly right in your assessments and judgment. I'll come back to them a little bit later. Now, what I guess I do need to do is to start by saying, what do I mean by influence? I mean, at the end of the day, I mentioned it wasn't about being cunning or underhanded or anything like that. So here's a definition. It's the power to make other people agree with your opinions or get them to do what you want willingly or ethically. Sounds great, doesn't it? It is power. It is also two things. It's about getting people to do things differently or getting people to think differently. So both of those things are relevant. But the point about all of that is to get them to do it willingly. In other words, they know that you're trying to influence them and they're quite happy as a result of that to be influenced. And you're doing it ethically. In other words, you're not doing it in any cunning and underhanded way. You're doing it up front. So that becomes really important as well. So I just want people to be clear, this is what I'm on about. And I'm not under, this is not about manipulation or anything like that. Okay, now I think there's an important point I want to make first before we sort of launch into that. And the point is this, that you and I are actually in the business of influence. I'm trying to influence you right now. You're trying to influence your team. You're trying to influence your boss. You're trying to influence your children. You're trying to influence your friends. You're trying to influence your colleagues. It never ends. We are all in the business of influence, and that's very important that we accept that reality, because without influence you can't get much done. Now, if that's the case, if you accept that proposition, which I hope you do, then the idea is to try to become as good at influencing as you possibly can. So in other words, that's what the profile was about, is to create an awareness in you as to how you like to influence other people, and then to make sure that you're not overusing certain influencing strategies and not underusing others. So that's our rationale for having this as one of the units in the Lunch and Learn series. Now, the truth of the matter is that in any influencing situation, regardless of what it is you're trying to influence people about, there are three characteristics that are important. There's your profile or your preference about how you like to influence, and your profile is about actually creating an awareness for you to show how you like to influence other people. And interestingly enough, how you like to influence other people is often how you like to be influenced yourself. So if you like facts, figures, and logic, and you do that and you use that a lot, then that's exactly how you like other people to try and influence you as well. So there's your style. But don't forget, the other person that you're trying to influence, or persons, depending on how many there are, they have a profile as well. Now, they haven't done the Lunch and Learn series, perhaps, and they certainly haven't done the diagnostic. They're most welcome to, I might say, but that's beside the point. They have a profile though, and it just hasn't been done on a printout, or they do have a way that they want to be influenced. And so obviously if you try and influence them your way and they have a different way, well, that's going to get off on the wrong footing, and we've all been there. And the third characteristic in the process is that there's the situation that you're in. Certain situations require certain types of influencing strategies. So obviously if it's a crisis, then collaboration is clearly not going to be the approach to use. So because you don't have the time to collaborate, you've got to get on and sort it out and just do what you need to do. So the important thing is that you've got your profile, other person's profile, and the situation you're in. Now, we're not clever enough, me, you, anybody, we're not clever enough to sit there and go, what's my style, what's their style, what's the situation I'm in? We just can't do that. So if that's the case, then here's the key point out of all of this. If plan A obviously isn't working, in other words, you're trying very hard to influence somebody else and it ain't working, in other words, the glaze goes in the person's eyes, for heaven's sake, change tack. Use another approach. That's the key message here. Be flexible. That's the key that I want you to take out of this. All right, so just a bit of preamble about influencing. Now, what you're going to see in a moment on your screen right now is the influencing capabilities framework. This isn't the profile, this is the framework. So this is the framework, or the model, whatever you want to call it, that is actually the construct around the influencing profile. Now, I do want to explain it to you, because you can then start to look at your profile and kind of understand why it is the way it is. So you'll notice that up here we have push and pull. So we have a push style and a pull style. So what do they actually mean? Well, there's a little graphic that might help you here. I'll put up, there it is. So the push style is very much around driving and proposing and giving information and blocking out other suggestions and, taking an idea to the person and so forth. So when you look at your profile, what's interesting there is whether your push or your pull style, and you get percentages around this, is higher. The pull style, as you can see, is the opposite. That's where you take people with you, you test understanding, you seek out information, you work with and through other people to get to a resolution. Now, ideally, you should have a 50-50 balance there or close to it. Now, if one's prominent over the other significantly, it's probably likely that your team members are aware of this. And in fact, if I went up to your team members and said, is your leader or manager more a push or a pull, they should be able to tell me, or actually, if they can't tell me, I'm happy with that because it means that you're both, which is exactly how you need to be. So those of you who have got a high score in one may find it a little bit more difficult to be the other. So that's one dimension. Now, the other dimension you can see over here on the left-hand side is the logical versus emotional approach. So let's talk about that for a minute. So people who have a logical approach, this is fairly self-explanatory, they do favour facts and evidence and logic and rationale and structure. Now, you know whether you're one of those types or not. And, again, you'll get a score if you have a look at your profile. What is your percentage for logical? And, of course, emotional is about values and feelings and beliefs and so forth. Now, most of our workplaces are set up around the logical approach to doing business. But the reality is, and this is a big misleading point that a lot of people forget, there are lots of people who are working in the world of work who are actually who are influenced by emotion more than logic. So just imagine if you're a very logical person and one of your colleagues is a very emotional in terms of the way they like to be influenced. Is it any wonder that you're going to have trouble trying to get through to them? Is it any wonder that they don't relate to you? And this may well explain it. Now, if you put all that together, you end up with 4 different influencing strategies. So investigation, which is a push logical strategy. Calculation, which is a pull logical strategy. So they're your 2 logical ones. And then you have you have motivation, which is a push emotional strategy, and collaboration, which is a pull emotional strategy. Now, each of them are useful, as I said before, in the right place, at the right time, with the right people, done the right way. But of course, we will gravitate to one of those more than the others because we feel comfortable with it. And therein lies our problem in terms of leading. Right, so your profile shows you that underpinning those 4 strategies are 4 capabilities. And those capabilities, I believe, are extremely important. They all add up. So the 4 capabilities underneath each of those add up to give you a score overall for your style or approach. Now, by the way, this isn't my profile. So some people might say, there's Tim's profile. No, it's not mine, but it is a real one. It is somebody I'm working with, and I'll explain that to you in a minute. But look, you notice that there's a score, percentage for each of the capabilities as well. This is important, and what I suggest you do with this is you go through it and you look for your low scores around the around the capabilities, right? So, for example, if you look at my colleague here and his scores, you'll notice that, he's got 33% in offering concessions. Now, that's where you scratch my back, I scratch yours, not in any cunning and underhanded way. It's just that you do me a favour, I do you a favour, that kind of thing. Now, obviously, he's got to learn to do more of that because it's not natural for him. That's why he got a low score in that. He also needs to try to learn to connect emotionally. And I'm working with him on that, as a matter of fact, in my coaching sessions with him. He knows that. He knows it's an issue. And he knows it's getting in the way of him being a more effective leader. Whereas he's still very open in his communication styles. You might say, well, how does that work? Well, he's obviously very open and very direct, but clearly you see he's active listening here versus but he doesn't share much of himself. He doesn't disclose a lot about himself. He's a very private person, very down the line, and that impacts on his ability to get the best out of people. He's highly logical in terms of the way he goes about things, as you can see, and I think that his push and pull style are pretty close, which is great. Which is what you want it to be, of course. And you can work at building these things up. Don't think that they're cast in stone. They're not like they're there forever. That's not exactly how it works. I've just got a question here. What sort of percentage is a low score, and is this low compatible to the rest of your own scores? Yeah, look, what I mean is it's compatible to the rest of your scores, Georgia. I'm collecting data around this. I mean, I'm not... when you do this, your name goes off it, but the data we keep. And so I'll be able to answer that question in a couple of years after a few people have done this, and you'll be able to get a comparative analysis between where you and other people are. But remember this, you put the information in. So therefore, if you're being tough on yourself, then obviously your score's going to be lower, aren't they? So yeah, just comparable with your own. But thanks for the question. All right, so that page in your profile should be extremely useful to you, I suspect. Now what I want to do is talk about these 4 strategies in a bit more depth, so it gives you a bit of an understanding how you can use them. So here's Al Gore. Now the investigators, and I use an adjective in there to describe them, the investigators, they like to marshal their facts and figures, and they like to argue based on a logical approach, and they do it very well. And if you've ever seen that video clip of Al Gore, The Inconvenient Truth, it's just slide after slide after slide, facts, figures, logic, graphs, charts, statistics. It's just bombarded with that. Now that's his style. That's how he likes to influence. And people who are investigators will naturally gravitate to facts and figures and logic. That's great, but what happens if you're dealing with someone that doesn't like all that? Then you're in trouble, and not everyone does like facts and logic, right? And this is a revelation for those who are investigators. So Al Gore was a classic. He was very much along those lines, but if you think about occupations in the workplace that use investigation as part of their work, you've got police. They normally go in and investigate a crime. They collect all the facts and evidence. They marshal a case, and the prosecutor will put a case forward to the court of law, who'll make a definition about whether that person's guilty or not guilty. And so we would expect that. I mean, we would expect our law officers to do that. But scientists do that as well. So when they create a hypothesis, they go out and test that hypothesis, and they then prove or disprove that hypothesis. And if they can prove it using a rigorous scientific methodology, then that can have enormous influence over other people and how they do their work. Now, where you would use this at work would be where you've got workplace incidents such as safety or harassment. Why? Well, people are expecting you to use due diligence in those sorts of circumstances and get your facts clear. So they expect you to go in and do that. Now, so you would use investigation as the relevant strategy there. Put a report together, go and do an investigation, and have some recommendations based on some fact. But if you've got a large-scale change initiative and you want everybody in your team on board, this is not necessarily the best way to go. And the reason it's not the best way to go is that you want to win the hearts and minds of people. You want to take them on the journey with you. So sometimes just throwing facts and figures at people isn't actually going to assist them to actually see that this is a relevant and proper way that I should move forward. Okay, so that gives you a little bit of an idea of when you should and shouldn't use it. So let's talk about Margaret Thatcher. Now, Margaret Thatcher is a clear calculator, or was, and I couldn't, all these words end in OR, and I had to have one that ended in OR. So calculator sounds a little bit sus, doesn't it? It sounds like you're up to no good. Well, it's not really. That was not my intention. That was not what it's about. But calculators tend to weigh up pros and cons. So what they do is they talk up the benefits of a situation in compelling terms, and they also talk down the opposition to those benefits. So they're very clear at articulating a way forward in terms of the benefits, the upsides, and the downsides. Let me give you a practical example. Last year, I was walking through a shopping centre and I walked past Harvey Norman's. And there was a sign on the door. I wasn't intending to go in there, but there was a sign on the door that said 40% off all laptops. And I thought to myself, well, you know what? I might go in and have a bit of a look. I don't intend to buy a computer, but what's the problem? I'll go and have a look. So as soon as I got through the door, there was another sign there that said, must purchase by the close of business today. So I'm in this position where I've got to buy a computer today if I want to get 40% off. Retailers use calculation as an influencing strategy. So what they were doing is leveraging, here's the benefit, 40% off, and here's the downside, must purchase by the close of business today. So you see, that's how they gain leverage. And Margaret Thatcher was a master of that. She used to explain very clearly what her policies were and the benefits of them, and then she would completely decimate any opposition that might come forth to challenge that. So they are usually very good debaters as a result of that. So let's look at it a bit closer. So if you look at this, you would say that the logical calculators, people who do this, salespeople, as I mentioned, very much the case. They use it all the time. Financial advisors, this is the best deal going at the moment, but you've got to get on the ground floor, that kind of mantra. And animal trainers, just took my daughter, youngest, to the circus the other day, which was a very nice experience. And she loves the animals. And the trainer who was in the circus had a whip in one hand and a pocket full of treats on the other. So the idea was that, the animal would either get a flogging or a treat. And that's how animal trainers coax animals into doing certain things. School teachers, to a certain extent, draw a very clear line in the sand. If you think about a teacher that you had that you really liked, they drew a line in the sand. You would dare not go over that line, but you knew where the line was nevertheless. So that's the sort of... So if you ended up being a calculator, you can probably get that. You love KPIs and all that kind of stuff. So any new workplace change that's affecting the people that work with you and the way they go about what they do, you need to sell the benefits. In other words, if it's a new software system, you need to talk it up. What are the benefits of this compared with the old system? Because that's going to be a stumbling block. You need to also talk about the disadvantages of not using the system. In other words, if we don't change, what will happen? What will be the problem? So that way people kind of think, well, I've got no choice here. I might as well go along with it because I can see the benefits, and there's certainly a lot of disadvantages for not using it, so I'm going to do it. So that's great, particularly for things like harassment or bullying legislation or training and things like that, where people probably are reluctant to go along. But the reality is that they need to because of the legislation, and they need to be sold on the benefits for them and the consequences of not going. But where there are situations that are vague and unclear, and there are a lot of those in our life, people, for example, we're moving into a new market area, or we're introducing a new system or process or something. If people aren't clear about that, they need the facts. So people have to explain clearly, why are we doing this? And of course, that's an investigation approach. So you can see how you can use the wrong approach in different situations. Any questions? Just sing out, because I'm happy to answer those as we go. Okay, moving right along, the next one that we'll look at is Martin Luther King. Now, I have a dream. That's the speech that he gave. Martin Luther King, as I said, was a brilliant orator. Brilliant. Now, you don't have to be a great orator to use some of the capabilities here, so don't get too hung up about that. But motivators tend to look at the big picture. So entrepreneurs are normally motivators. They paint a compelling picture of the future, and then they sell people on that idea and surround themselves with people that are excited by that dream, which is precisely what Martin Luther King did in 1965 with his speech, I Have a Dream. So they're very good at painting a compelling big picture. So they're big picture thinkers, basically, and they're not all that excited about detail. And if you're a motivator, you've probably tried to, share the vision with someone on your team who just doesn't get it. And that can be very frustrating, because that can be explained by the fact that they may not be motivators, whereas you are. And so you need to try another tack in order to get your way with them as such. So let's look at this a bit further. So if we think about motivators, you've got people, as I said, who are entrepreneurs. So entrepreneurs, very much around that. You've got people who are advertising executives. They've only got a split second to sell you on something. And basically, they've got a tug at the heartstrings. There's none of this sort of facts. They can't give you too many of those. And the ones that do are a little bit sus anyway, as you know. Public relations executives, artistic directors, got to keep the show on the road. All of them have got to be big picture thinkers. Very much the case. So if you were trying to develop a new strategic direction where you are trying to win the hearts and minds of your team, then this is for you. So you might take people out on a retreat and have butcher's paper flying everywhere. You'd come up with some vision about what it is that you're aiming for, some flowery words, and then off you go. Now, I'm not being cynical about that, because I think that can be a very useful exercise, but nevertheless, that would be ideal for that. And those of you who are motivators would probably completely get that. But if somebody in your team is unclear about the rationale for a new initiative, such as the fact that there's going to be budget cuts over 2019. All of a sudden it's announced, budget cuts. There's no good, if you're the leader, trying to say to people, come on, we've just got to look at the big picture. They want to know, one, how deep are the cuts? Two, where are the cuts going to be? Three, how am I going to be impacted on those? Can you see that people will want to know that before they want to know about the big picture, about where to from here? They want to know that stuff. So Georgia just says, makes sense. This is my second strongest area. I'm assuming you're talking about motivation. As I'm in the newly created role department, creating new programs and driving new projects. And I do love a good stash of butcher's paper and coloured pens. It makes sense. But remember, the thing that you need to realise, Georgia, is not everyone in your team thinks like you, and you're going to be very careful with that. So vary your style, vary your approach, but good to hear that you can relate to it. All right, moving right along. Now, the last of the four, before I launch into a couple of things that you can do, is Mother Teresa and the Collegial Collaborator. So collaborators involve other people in the decision-making process and take people with them. So they're brilliant at taking people and working with them and formulating ideas in and around what they need to do. She was great at that because she bought a lot of NGOs and government agencies and people who volunteered into her realm, and it was a really impressive exercise. So collaborators like to work with and through other people. And again, if you're a collaborator, your blind spot will be that you might try and talk to someone. They don't want to know about it. You know, just tell me what to do and I'll get on with it. That can be very frustrating for a collaborator because they want to engage the other person and the other person doesn't actually want to be engaged. It can be problematic. So if you think about some occupations that fit the bill here, you've got conductors of orchestras. Now, conductors don't even use an instrument, right? Sometimes they don't even have a baton. They just use their hands. And they work with an orchestra and defer to different sections in the orchestra at different times and create a beautiful ensemble and get paid a lot of money at the same time, I might say. But they are the ultimate collaborators because they're collaborating with the musicians to create an ensemble that's great. Funeral directors, wow, you know, they've got to coordinate all of these different stakeholders and bring it all together when most people obviously don't want to be at a funeral. So that becomes a little bit more difficult. Then you've got choreographers with shows, they've got people with egos, they've got to really sort of relate to them and build trust up and show patience because otherwise the show doesn't go on. So in circumstances where there is a diversity of views in your team, so let's say your team's got very strong views about something, one way or the other, like there's two camps, I strongly recommend you should get the team together and give both teams an opportunity to share, just to share their views and to do it in a respectful way. And I think by doing that, you'd be surprised at how effective it is. It can be extremely powerful because it unearths and brings forward, you know, people start to learn and from each other. But look, it's no good trying to get everyone together if they want to know the facts about something. So if you're introducing a new customer relationship management system into the IT area or something, people aren't going to be all that interested in talking about how they're going to make it work until they understand the logic and the rationale. Why was this decision made? And that's a legitimate question. And there needs to be a legitimate answer, and really the team leader needs to do that. So you can see that using it in the wrong time can be problematic for you. So your profile is really helpful because there's lots of things in there for you to think about and to consider and to weigh up and to investigate and look at further. So I hope that's been useful as an overview of the profile. So what I want to do now in the short time we've got left, which is about 10 or so minutes, if you've got other questions, go for your life now. I want to share with you some tools that I think are very useful for you to be able to use all four of those, okay? So the idea for you is not to get boxed into using just one of these four approaches. The trick for you is to use all four. And if you use all four, imagine how influential you'll be. Now, let me give you a quick example. Let's say you're going to give a presentation. Now, if you prepare for that presentation and you've got to convince people about something, so fair enough, the first slide could be the facts. Here are the facts. So you're using investigation. Here is the situation. The second slide could be on the big picture and how it actually locks into a government initiative, or this is the organisational's imperative. So that's now using motivation. Then you might defer to the group and ask them to get involved in the conversation, right? So you involve people, and by involving people, you're using collaboration. And then you end up talking about the pros and cons in your last slide. I'm now using calculation. How could you not be highly influential? You see, that's how you use it deliberately. Or is it best to cover off all four styles when preparing for a verbal or written briefing or presentation? Yeah, just gone through that, Georgia. Yeah, I think I read your mind. yeah, that's what you need to do. You prepare using all four, which is exactly what you need. Right, let's talk about investigation. You can use third-party endorsements. That's where you get other people that have walked the talk who may make a comment, or even you just defer to, who have got instant credibility because they've done something. That's what people who are authors like me do. And at the back of the book, there's a little sort of testimonial there from somebody that's got credibility. They help me sell the book by saying how wonderful it is. And people say, oh, I like that person, so I'm going to buy Tim's book. Structured interviews is how we interview people for jobs, and the trick for us is that we ask the same questions to each person, so that when we get the result, we can validate that, and we've gone through and we don't always make the right choices. We understand that, but at least we can justify our decision based on a reliable and valid process. So structured interviews are very powerful when you want to use investigations. If you're investigating somebody in the workplace and you ask the same questions to different people, that's a good method. It's a good methodology. Surveys, we're all surveyed out, aren't we? And I think one of the reasons surveys are so popular is because they are so influential. When a survey comes out, when opinion polls come out, political parties, they all say they don't look at it, but they all look at it, and they all make their own judgments based on opinion polls. The other thing you could use is processing mapping, which is you seeing in front of you a process. You can map out your process with your team. And, if you did it with your team, you're using two forms. Think this through. If you do this exercise with your team, you're using collaboration, and also you're using investigation. So when you combine two, it gets really powerful. And you look at the process and look at the pitfalls in the process. Talk to people about how you might improve the process. What can we do differently, or whatever, so those things are critically important. So there's 4 things for investigation. Now, if we go to the next slide and we look at calculation, you can use what Kurt Lewin invented, which was a force field analysis, and all he did is draw a line down the center of a page. He became famous for that. And then on the left-hand side, he wrote down all the driving forces. So driving forces are all the things in favor of this change, all the things that are going to promote and help this initiative to get up. And then on the other side are restraining forces, which are all the things that are likely to get in the way and cause problem for them for getting this to operate. That in itself can be problematic as well, because those are the things that are going to get in the way. Tanya's asking, do you think anonymous surveys work? Well, it's all about the methodology, Tanya. Look, there's pros and cons. I can say to you this, that there's no perfect way of collecting information. If you have it anonymous, it can mean that people can be open, but they can also hide behind their comments as well. And of course, if you have the survey as open, where people can, that we know who said what, people might be so frank. So it has problems both ways. But I personally think the best survey is the old-fashioned conversation. Just talk to someone. You can get a lot better. You can learn a lot more doing it that way than you would online. But, people don't often see it that way necessarily. Cost-benefit analysis is where you weigh up the costs and the benefits. So if the benefits outweigh the costs, then it's clearly a goer. But if the costs outweigh the benefits, then it's clearly a non-goer. And you've got after-action reviews where you can actually say to people, what went well, what didn't go well, and what will we do differently next time. And you could all do that starting tomorrow or starting this afternoon. It's a fancy title for a debrief, but you're using 3 questions. What went well, even if it was a really bad thing, it'll be something would have gone well. What didn't go well, and what will we do differently? So it's a great little strategy. The military use that a lot. Okay, now let's move on to motivational tools. You've got a team values charter, so setting a set of values around how your team likes to operate with each other. I'm going to cover that in more detail in the rest of the Lunch and Learn, so I'll leave that for the time being. Many of you would be aware of the GROW model, which is a coaching model. GROW stands for goal, reality, options, and what next. So it's a way of actually getting the other person to come up with their own ideas and for you not to carry around the monkey on your back as a result of that, which is often the case. Telling stories is useful. I don't mean, I'm talking about real stories about yourself and your own experience is far more powerful than giving someone a lecture about something. So if you tell someone a story, we're all attuned to listen to stories and we all like stories. We all remember stories. So use stories. Now, the other thing I'd suggest you all do is at the beginning of every single meeting you have, why not have a good news story? Call it win for the week or whatever you want to call it. Go around the table and ask people, win for the week. You'll create an upward spiral of positivity and it'll be off to a good start. And I think that's something very simple that you could all do as of your next meeting. Now, collaboration, finally. Begin with the end in mind, said the late Stephen Covey in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So what that means is that, get your team together, set them a goal. Say for the next hour, I want us to all be on the same page. I want a resolution, whatever it is that you're trying to get to, and then you let them go. I mean, sure, if they go off track, you can remind them you've only got, 40 minutes to go, whatever it is. That works really well. Okay, you'd be surprised how well that works. So you don't need to micromanage the meeting, just let it go, but give them a clear direction about where you want to go and a time frame. Giving any sort of feedback, and that's why Unit 1 was all about effective feedback, is actually a collaboration tool because you're doing it and you're wanting them to give feedback about themselves as well. Problem solving can be done in a collaborative format as well. And when you paraphrase or you use active listening, you're actually using collaboration as a strategy because you're connecting with the other person and there's evidence of connection by you using those skills. All right, now I've gone through those fairly quickly. They're all in my book. If you want to get a copy of that, it's all spelled out there. But anyway, the bottom line with all of this is that I'm going to give you some homework. And I want you to complete your profile and implement at least one of the tools that we've looked at today. I want you to actually become more influential. I want you to give this a really good shake. And I want you to get out of your comfort zone and I want you to work on some of the capabilities where you had low percentages. The high percentages don't worry me in the slightest, except to say, high compared to the others, except to say that you're probably overusing them and relying on them too much. And it's about time you use the other ones in the process. All right, so folks, that's it for me. We will catch up, I think it's 2 weeks' time. Just got a quick... Oh, okay. Thanks, Tanya. That's very kind of you. I got some feedback. Thank you. So we'll catch up in 2 weeks. I wish you all the very best. And I would say to you, it's really important to try to influence and do the very best you can. And by the way, have a wonderful weekend. Thank you, and see you in a fortnight.